partners in the room, please keep your questions specific to those two topics. And then, as always, my team will be here to hang out with you afterwards to answer any questions that you may have otherwise with that. So starting off with fentanyl. On August 21st, the DEA is observing National Fentanyl Prevention and Awareness Day. But we've got to understand that recognizing the dangers of fentanyl is an everyday thing. Not just across the country, but here at home in Charlotte. The DEA administrator calls fentanyl the single deadliest drug threat our nation has ever encountered. Your CMPD officers would echo that sentiment. That's what we're seeing out on the streets. You're going to hear a lieutenant who has been here almost 30 years. He's going to speak on what he has seen and what he has not seen before in this community. He's going to talk to you about the very real dangers of that drug. And that lieutenant is Sean Mitchell.
Thank you. Good morning. As Lieutenant Fishbach described fentanyl, it is probably one of the most dangerous drugs that law enforcement and probably this country has ever encountered. There are numerous examples of some pretty sad stories. We have the story of the 13-year-old in Colorado who died from an overdose and his mom found him in the bathroom. Certainly a tragic event. We have some local stories here where a young woman from a Latin American country recently arrived in America, went out with some friends, and the very next day she was deceased because of suspected drug overdose. So it is national and it is local. So, you know, the timing of this is appropriate. Kids are going back to school with that. It means there's going to be more socialization, there's going to be more parties and more temptation. We really would like to stress that the fact that fentanyl is still as dangerous as it ever was, and it will kill you very, very quickly. So as little as, 2 milligrams of this stuff will cause you to die. And, you know, we like to throw up pictures of what fentanyl looks like. We like to try to describe to people what it looks like on the streets, but the reality of that is that fentanyl is in everything now, everything. You know, our policy is we test drugs. Not every single drug item that's turned in do we test, but the drug items that we do test are usually because we're getting ready to go to trial on that case. So in 2017, 38 of those samples tested positive for fentanyl. In 2021, 176 of those samples tested positive for fentanyl. And what I mean by that is that it's not just a baggie of fentanyl that the officers are turning in. This is cocaine. This is what we think is Oxycontin. This is Xanax. This is meth. So I really want to stress to people in this community that the drug is in every single thing. And many times, the drug dealers that are selling this do not even know what is in that substance that they're selling. So some broad stats. Obviously, everyone is aware that last year was a record year in overdose deaths. There was 107,000 deaths nationwide. In Charlotte, we had 213 deaths. 88% of those were tied to fentanyl. Our call volume, call for service, where we are responding to overdose calls, patrol officers responding, in 2020, we averaged about 138, and last year, we averaged about 160. That's a month. So you can see the call volume has increased dramatically. We are still averaging that now. So this year, we have 90 suspected overdose deaths. 37% of that is tied to fentanyl. We have the labs back on the victim's blood, and we can absolutely confirm that. Those stats are as of 7/31 of 2022. So, we really want to stress again that, you know, there is no safe recreational drug use any longer. Until this stuff is removed from the supply system, you're not going to get an Oxycontin pill, a Xanax pill at a party and know exactly what that is. And anybody that tells you different is lying to you and just trying to make money from you. If you encounter someone who is possibly in an overdose situation, we hope that you have Narcan nearby. Please administer that. Call 911. It is not our policy at this police department to target drug users, but it is our policy to target drug sellers. So if you have information on someone who is selling narcotics, I encourage you to call Crime Stoppers so that we can hopefully address that individual and get them in custody and take that stuff off the streets. Thank you.
Thank you, Lieutenant Mitchell, and for this opportunity to speak with you about what we're seeing on the treatment side. Again, fentanyl knows no boundaries. It's everywhere. We're beginning to see it in treatment settings with individuals who are chronic marijuana smokers that suddenly test positive for fentanyl, and they're surprised, and they have no idea. So when we say that it's everywhere, it is truly showing up in places that we never expected. So to give you a little bit about McLeod Center and what we do, we treat individuals with substance use disorders primarily in 9 different care locations from Monroe to Marion, North Carolina. Our largest service line is medication-assisted treatment for individuals who use opioids, who are diagnosed with an opioid use disorder. Historically, many of them came to us with a history of what they thought was heroin use. But in 2018, we really began to see an uptick in the presence of fentanyl. And recently, we did, toward the beginning of the summer, we tested about 1,600 patients. Our census is usually anywhere around 2,900 patients across the organization. But in 1,600 urine drug screens done over a 60-day period, 1 in 4 were fentanyl positive. These were patients that had been with us, and these were new patients coming to see us. So it's a struggle in our communities for individuals who are already battling addiction, coming into contact with a synthetic that is far more powerful. The half-life of fentanyl is much longer than heroin, meaning the drug stays in your system much longer than what heroin does. And that's why it's so potent and powerful, because somebody encounters it and it's like, wow, hey, I really feel good. This is the good stuff, and it's staying with me a little bit longer. I'm not having to use as often. We had a patient who was at work one day, and she didn't feel well. So she asked one of her coworkers, hey, can I get a Tylenol? I've got a headache. So what happens? Friend gives her a pill. She took it. She was like, oh, okay. I don't quite feel right, but she didn't think too much about it. She came in to see us a couple of days later for her routine visit. Her urine drug screen showed fentanyl. She thought she was taking a Tylenol. And ever since that exposure, she struggled with the medication amount that she's taking to be stable for her opioid use disorder because of this exposure. We're seeing a rise in pressed pills. The pills look different. The pills look like common medications. They get confused. Like I said, she thought she was taking a Tylenol. They also were seeing them being mixed at varying levels of fentanyl. And so what this has done for us on the treatment side is it's created an issue around safety. When someone comes in to see us, we assume that there's a fentanyl exposure because the individual may not know that they've even taken it. And so from a safety standpoint, if you saw a little bit earlier, the penny and the amount of dust that was beside it, that can be deadly, depending on who comes into contact with it and what their prior exposure level has been. With medication, or with the fentanyl synthetic staying in your system longer, what we are finding is that patients are requiring more medication just to keep from drug seeking. Because with opioid use disorder, if you're taking a medication such as methadone or buprenorphine, which is the generic for Suboxone, if you're taking that medication and you have a continued exposure, then depending on what's in that synthetic, what we're seeing is that patients are needing more and more methadone and buprenorphine just to be stable and to stop the craving and the drug-seeking behavior. So this is about safety. Fentanyl is everywhere, and like Lieutenant Mitchell said, there is no recreational use anymore. And as we're approaching back to school, this is an opportunity for parents really to talk to your kids about who they trust, because who they may have trusted in the past, they may not be able to trust anymore, because we're learning that people who our patients thought they could trust, they're getting exposed to medication that is deadly, potentially deadly. We had a patient recently who was stable, had been with us for several years, had a fentanyl exposure. It sent him into such a tailspin that his medication had to be increased 30 milligrams, which is a significant medication increase, and he's not stable yet. And he's struggling with that. This is the power of what's on the streets now. And it's going to take all of us, parents, adults, young people, paying attention to what's going on around us, who you're with, and what you're doing. Because the only way that we're going to drive down overdoses is if we continue to talk about what we're seeing and how people are behaving. We had one patient who tested positive for fentanyl, and he worked with his counselor to figure out how he could have possibly been exposed, and he kept swearing up and down, I haven't used, I haven't used, I haven't used. And after he worked with his counselor, he realized, oh, wait a minute, I switched my marijuana dealer. And that's where his exposure came from. So you can't trust your drug dealer anymore. It's the wild, wild west right now when it comes to treatment, because the first thing we have to do is make sure someone is safe. The components in the fentanyl and the derivatives of fentanyl that are on the street now are powerful, and they're designed to keep people coming back. But there is hope out there, because when we address this together as a community, and we continue to have the conversations around addiction, recovery, and treatment, then we all can heal. And recovery is possible. The stories that I've shared highlight how difficult it is now that we have fentanyl so prevalent in our community. But we need to continue these conversations. And they can be difficult for parents, but with back to school, it can be deadly if you don't have it. Thanks, Lieutenant Fishbaugh.
And we are going to completely shift gears and start talking about what students and parents, as well as our partners, can do to help prepare for back to school with School Resource Officer Sergeant Crystal Fletcher.
Good morning, and thank you, Lieutenant Fishback. Today I'm here to talk to you about school safety, and the first safety concern I'd like to talk to you about are firearms. So last year, from August of 2021 to May of 2022, CMPD seized 28 firearms on CMS campuses. So in the first semester, from August to December, 23 of those firearms were seized. Thanks to the dedication and hard work of our school resource officers, our patrol division officers, as well as CMS police, only 5 of those firearms were seized in the second semester. We want that number to be 0 this year. So we urge parents to please lock up your firearms. CMPD has actually charged parents for being careless with their firearms when those firearms end up in juvenile hands or at our school campuses, or even worse. Also, please do not keep your firearms in your vehicles. That just presents an opportunity for the firearm to be stolen and to end up in the wrong hands. We also urge parents to talk to their students or children about not touching a firearm. CMPD gives out gun locks, and in the last 5 years, we've given out over 10,000 gun locks. We partner with the community area churches, United Neighborhoods of Charlotte, and Mothers of Murdered Offspring to give out these gun locks. The community can go to community events and get the gun locks, or they can go to our division offices as well. If you need a gun lock, please reach out to us and we will make sure we get you one. On top of providing gun locks and education to this community, CMPD aims to prevent firearms on our campuses through Campus Crime Stoppers. This program has been successful in helping remove drugs and weapons from our campuses, as well as providing information that results in solving crimes such as vandalism, assaults, and threats to students. Campus Crime Stoppers offers rewards up to $500. Tips can be submitted anonymously at 704-334-1600. Tips can also be submitted anonymously through the See Something, Say Something app, through the school resource officer, or by calling 911. The second safety concern I'd like to talk to you about today are school threats. We take school threats very seriously and investigate them all very thoroughly. Threats can be said, posted, Snapchatted, tweeted, texted. So parents, please be aware of your child's social media, what they are posting, what their friends are posting, and talk to them about being respectful and considerate while on social media. CMPD urges students to think before they post. A thoughtless post could end up in school disciplinary action or a felony charge. A fake school threat is not a prank, it's a crime. These school threats can also be reported the same ways that I mentioned earlier, through Crime Stoppers anonymously, the See Something, Say Something app, through the school resource officer, or through 911. The final back-to-school safety concern I'd like to address with you is traffic safety. With thousands of students returning to school over the next few weeks, please be aware and cognizant of what is going on around you. Don't speed through school safety zones and stop school buses. North Carolina has stiff penalties for drivers who fail to obey these traffic laws, and both of these violations could result in hefty fines as well as points on your driver's license. Please do not put the lives of children at risk or yourselves, and slow down in the school safety zones and stop for stop buses. Thank you.
Okay, to our media partners, we're going to open it up to questions. Due to the fact that we have 3 speakers and 2 completely different topics, help us out. Once we have one speaker up here, if you have questions, ask it to that speaker. Hold your questions for the other speakers. I promise we'll get them all up here. All right, so let's open it up. Yes, ma'am.
It would be for CMPD. When you folks come to an unattended death, is a blood test automatically taken for fentanyl, or does there have to be some kind of circumstances there that lead to that person that may have passed away?
So the question being, when we respond to an overdose death, is there an automatic blood test?
Unattended, say you find someone and you're not sure of the circumstances.
Right. So when we respond and it appears to be a overdose death, then the medical examiner's office will be included in on the investigation. We do send blood work off for toxicology to the state and obviously get those results back. Yes, sir, over here.
For the fentanyl, are you doing anything different to keep officers safe? And what I mean by that is, in South Carolina, there was an incident where a deputy was collecting drug paraphernalia and it had fentanyl on it, and she got sick. So I guess, is there any risk to officers, and how are you keeping them safe?
I would say 2015 or 16, we became aware of that. Actually, DEA pushed out some training on that topic, and we embraced it, and we trained all of our officers. They have all the equipment they need, N95 masks, certain containers to put drugs in, and most of them have Narcan now. So, I mean, if there is an exposure, they can react pretty quickly. We have not had any exposure that we can actually prove. We've had some Narcan use on one detective, but we can't say for certain that that was actually an exposure. It could have been other things that he did get powder in his face. We're not sure if he had some type of stress response to that, or actually it was an exposure to fentanyl.